Welcome to H2K Infosys. H2K Infosys is a e-verify business based in Atlanta, Georgia, United States. We provide 100% job-oriented, instructor-led, face-to-face, true live online software training programs. It also includes access to cloud test lab with software tools. We provide live project for you to work on. We also provide assistance with mock interviews, resume preparation and review, and job placement assistance. H2K Infosys is trusted by so many students across the world. H2K Infosys provides world-class services in IT training with real-time project work for corporates and individuals, special IT training for MS students in the United States, software design, development, QA manual and automation, performance testing and maintenance, IT staff augmentation, job placement assistance, and tech support.
Now, inside the property, now till now what you did is you just define the value here or reference here. But whenever you have collection, you will go inside the property and you will define those. Okay, and you will define with the help of some elements. Let me show that. There is element called list. You will have similar elements for map. You will have similar elements for set. Okay, and you know use cases when you should use set, when you should use list. Okay, and now you should be very clear about it. Okay, you still have questions? Let me know. Okay, and now within this list, remember that we are writing within this list. You have either area references, and here you can define beans. Okay, so you can have list of beans. Okay, or you can have direct values. So what to define values here? Value. Okay, and you can just mention value here. Let's see, mouse. And keyboard. You can have multiple things here. An endless thing, mouse pad. Okay, this is it. So you can pass the stuff like this, or there is another way. You can pass a bean if that particular list is an object list. Okay, so definitely all these things are valid, and let's test this stuff whether we get proper values here. So in laptop, what I need to get is, let me add for str get accessories. Okay, this is str. Okay, this is it. So now what I'm doing is I'm accessing the entire list from the laptop and trying to print it. If the laptop is loaded properly, by default the laptop bean has a property where we are printing collection. We should be get printed. So let's see whether we are getting it. Of course we do. So we get everything from XML. You can define that inside our XML itself. Okay, so where are we using this? Why are we using this? Okay, how do you control when the beans are instantiated? How do you control? What need to control? What exact control you are talking about? Load time versus access. Okay, so there is something called bean scope, and we will understand those scopes now. Okay, so that's this is the point we should understand that. So let's discuss it. But before that, yes, we got all the values properly, and you can similarly use map. You can similarly use that. There is no difference in what you actually set in there. So they have support. The Spring has support for all the collection types, and you can also use what objects, the beans, references. Okay, absolutely fine. Now, think about this. Whatever Spring is loading, how it loads it. The question is how to control the bean. Okay. So, as I told you, Spring is a bean container. It has a scope for each and every bean, and that particular thing is called as bean scopes. So, let's understand what are the bean scopes real quick. So, when we are discussing Spring has a default scope called whenever we call uh, okay, so we consider this as a Spring container, and of course your Java class whatever you are invoking is also a part of Spring container, but let's consider this as a Spring as of now. Okay, just for understanding. And the Java class where you are invoking is here. Okay, so this is your Java class, and you are asking your Spring container to give an object. So whenever you say that, of course your context, and you know this is application context. Okay, and you say get bean. So whenever this get bean get executed, where and how these beans are created and given to you. So this is very important. So depending on what context you are using, depending on object of this context. Right now, what object you are using application context, right? So depending on this, it actually depends like what exactly it's given to you, how many beans, how the beans are given to you. So whenever you call context.getBean, okay, the default way of returning a bean to this class is Singleton. Now, who can tell me what is Singleton? Of course, yes, you got it right. So Singleton means there exists only instance, a single instance. Now, whatever I am telling you right now is very important, okay? Because there is a small difference between Singleton I specify here and Singleton I told you on design pattern. Whenever I am saying that the context.getBean has a default scope of Singleton, that means this particular class exists in this Spring container. Only one instance of this class exists in this Spring container. Okay, that does not mean that you cannot create your own instance of that class. Okay, in normal Singleton pattern you will not be able to create that instance again. Okay, very important interview question. When Singleton scope of a Spring, whenever we are referring Singleton scope of a Spring, this is Singleton to Spring container, not Singleton to JVM. Understood what I am supposed to tell you? Okay, so this means that this washer.getBeans, how many times I call washer.getBeans, I will be getting exact same object. But that doesn't stop me to do this. Is anybody stopping me to do that? And does that make sure that whatever written by Spring matches this? No. You can create your own instances. Okay? But the Spring will take care of that. How many times you call that particular getBean method, you will always get the same instance. Okay? By default. This is default. So by default, you get Singleton, and again this Singleton means to Spring. Okay? Questions here? I know, little confusing. So in one session it's the same instance. Okay. Now the session is different. Session is a different stuff. Okay? That is web aware context. We will talk about it in a minute. But before that, okay? Now this is just a standalone application context I am talking about. In that, whenever you are talking about getBean, by default it's not. Okay? And how do you change it? If you don't want that, you can change it and you can make it as a prototype. Okay? Clear that. So the first thing you learned is by default the scope is what? Singleton. Okay. The another thing is, the second thing is, if you don't want singleton, this is default behavior. If you don't want this, then another behavior is prototype. And what is prototype? Prototype means whenever user is executing Spring context or whatever context you want, application context or class path or XML context or whatever, whenever it executes getBean, whenever getBean is executed, return a new instance. So this is prototype. Okay, isn't this a name already? Okay, what Spring is doing? Why this is called as prototype? Because Spring is using which pattern here? Prototype pattern. Okay, so Spring holds an instance of that particular bean and gives clones every time you call getBean. Okay, so it just gives clones of that particular object, and this particular is a prototype pattern. Okay, and how do you really define? So if there is a default behavior and if you want to change that behavior to prototype, how do you really define? So you can do that with the help of, whenever you are defining that, you can just tell that I want scope as prototype. That means every time you execute getBean, new instance will be written. Okay, isn't that simple to understand? Okay. So this is it. So these are the two important scopes we have for Spring application context. But there are other contexts also, because Spring is not limited to standalone application. So you do have web application. In web application, you cannot hold singleton objects. You have more than prototype objects. You have something called as HTTP request. You have something called as HTTP session. So you can decide or you can define a new object every time there is a new HTTP request comes in. So this is it for standalone. And now we will understand. Okay, this is for application context. So application. Now there is another context type, and which is called as web aware application. Web aware, that means you will be using Spring in web, and web aware means it understands what is HTTP request or scope of HTTP request. Okay, and response and session. Okay, so it understands these things. It knows these objects. Okay, that's why it's called as web aware application context. Okay, in this particular context, you have different scope. Okay, this will not satisfy the needs of course, you can use singleton. Of course, you can use prototype, but you can have something which is specific to request. So there is a scope called as request scope. That means whenever you call, not again Spring, context dot getBean. Okay, whenever you call context dot getBean, new object is created for every new HTTP request. Is that hard to understand? New object is getting created for new HTTP request. If the request is same, then getBean will return the same object. Okay, and similarly, you have very similar concept called session scope. And you can tell me, what does that mean? It means, of course, yes, absolutely right. Of course, when the session is same, if the session is same, then context.getBean will return the same object. Okay, see, even if you call that 6 times, and if you are in the same session, you will get the same object again and again. Okay, exact same instance of the object. But if session changes, so for every new session, new object is created. Okay, so remember these two. So these are for web aware. Okay, so these are two important concepts for web aware context. So this is how Spring actually creates and actually manages the instances it creates, bean it creates, and controls the instantiation of bean. So first thing is singleton, that means single instance in entire Spring container. Again, Spring container. Prototype, every time get bean called, new instance will be returned. Okay, it will use prototype pattern. This will use singleton pattern. Okay, we already understood these two particular patterns. Okay, you know that. Now in web aware context, you have request scope and session scope. Request scope, for a single request, till the request is valid, context.getBean will return the same instance. Okay, and in session scope, till the session is valid, okay, in the same session, context.getBean will return, always return a same instance. Okay, do we have questions here? This is very important in the process of interview. You should very deeply understand what these two types are. Give you 2 minutes to analyze and solve that. And if you are up to this question and explain scope, definitely it will ask you whether you can create another instance of that object if it is a singleton in Spring. The answer is absolutely yes. You can. Nobody is stopping you to create your own instance without Spring. Singleton is only scoped to your Spring context. Okay? Okay. In the case, what is the difference between request and session? Can you please explain? Yeah, absolutely. So what is in the HTTP request? HTTP request is whenever client is requesting something. Okay. So this is your client. Okay. And you remember HTTP request, right? And this is your server. Now this loop is your HTTP request till the response is served. Okay. But remember that, so this is only one. So if your scope is request, okay, and if this is calling Spring 6 times, every time it calls getBean, it will return exact same amount. Okay. Now response is returned, and now request 2 comes, and if request 2 calls Spring getBean, then the new instance, this will not be created, new instance will be returned, because now request is other request. Both the request 1 and request 2 can be in the same session. Isn't that true? One session can have multiple requests. Is that hard to follow? Okay. So one session can have multiple requests in it. Till session is valid. Think about this. So if your scope is session for request 2 and request 1, oh, I should indicate the same stuff. Request 1 and request 2, for both the request, Spring.get context will return exact same because the scope is session. Till the session is valid, you will get this same instance. Okay? Is that clear now? I'm a little confusing, but not that much. You guys are awesome. You can understand. What if you get many requests at a time? Yes, you can get many requests at a time, and object will be created for each and every request. There is no harm in that. Even servlet does that. Even web application does that. Okay? It's completely possible that you can get thousands and thousands of requests at the same time. Okay? Those many beans will be created. There is no harm in doing that. Okay? And there is a proper object management with using Spring MVC. If you are using Spring MVC with this mobile context and everything, it will be very easy to get these objects properly aligned. There will not be any memory issue as such. Okay, it will handle it very properly. No concern. Of course, it can handle multiple. There is no issue in that. Any Java application can handle it. So when we are talking about web aware, so always remember whenever we are talking about web aware, it's impossible to restrict a web application not having multiple requests at a time. Of course, we created a web application for having multiple requests, isn't it? So if we are allowing multiple requests in web aware, web aware means that you are allowing multiple requests in web. Okay, so definitely it can handle it. There is no issue in that. Okay, absolutely they can do it. Right questions and very good questions. Okay. So now this is a good point to understand auto wiring. So what is wiring and what is auto wiring? So wiring is what? Wiring is something done by an electrician. Okay, not more than that. So remember this, whenever I am declaring this like constructor element type equals to something, value equals to G, constructor element value equals to 5, there is something happening here. Think about this. There is something happening. How does it know that first argument is going to washer's company? And how does it know that the second argument is going to washer's gallons or capacity? So there is something called as auto wiring. So automatically wire the stuff together. And how is that wiring happen? How does that wiring actually take place? So that concept is called as auto wiring, and Spring does auto wiring for you. By default, Spring wiring is by type. Okay, remember that people always confuse. So there are two types of wiring. There are multiple though, but important to understand are only two. There is another called as constructor, but that is again type. So there are two types of wiring. The first wiring type is called as by. So by type means Spring identify the element by type of element, whether it's type of string, whether it's type of another object, whether it's type of configuration. Okay, so Spring identifies that with type. Okay, and another is by name. Means wire the elements by their names. So names means if you name it like config, okay, and that means that this will be wired to this element. Okay, so this is wiring by name. So wiring by name, we always saw that whenever we match it, wiring by name, we do that wiring in format as well. You remember that we always match whatever we declared in our bean class, exactly matching to not bean class, we call it entity class. I don't get confused in that, entity class to our external. So this particular wiring we are very comfortable with. What we are not comfortable with is by type. Okay, so let's understand what is this by type. So see here, and we already saw a small example here with, like whenever I am declaring a constructor type equals to java.lambda string and value is GE and constructor argument value is 5. Okay, now let's add two constructors again, okay, to make it more confusing for Spring, and let's understand how Spring does wiring for us. Let's another argument constructor which only gets company, and let's have one more constructor which gets capacity in gallons.
So many of our students have given testimonials on how our training programs are. You will find them on kudzu.com and on our website h2kinfosys.com. On our website h2kinfosys.com, you will also find more detailed information on who we are, the courses that we offer, what each course covers. Also, if you're interested in a demo program, please register on our homepage on the left-hand side. Just give us more information about yourself and we will send you a link for a demo class. The demo class is absolutely free. Experience our commitment by just attending an orientation workshop at no cost. Our team of faculty and advisors are here to guide you with the right information. If you still have more questions, please feel free to call us. Call us at 770-777-1269. This is a United States number. If you're calling from the UK, call us at 020-337-17615. You can also email us at training@h2kinfosys.com or h2kinfosys@gmail.com. Thank you for watching our videos. We wish you a great career in information technology.